The planet Curses 9 was cold, dry, and full of death. Once a mining colony, it was now a battlefield between two powerful species, humans and the Zalari. Smoke rose from blackened rocks, and broken machines lay scattered across the surface. Nothing green grew here anymore. Lieutenant Dane Rourke stood at the edge of a ridge, looking down at the enemy base. His helmet's visor showed moving red dots, Zalari soldiers running below. Dane was calm, focused, and ready. He was a soldier of the United Terran Forces, and he had a mission: destroy the enemy base and eliminate all survivors. Squad. Bravo. Ready for assault, said a voice in his ear. It was Sergeant Keller, his longtime friend. Move in. No survivors. We finish this fast, Dane replied. Dane jumped down the rocky slope with his squad behind him. Laser fire lit the air as the humans clashed with the Zalari. The alien fighters were tall, with scales like armor and glowing yellow eyes. They hissed and roared, fighting hard to protect their base. But the humans were faster, smarter, and better equipped.
Nice.
Dane led from the front, taking down enemies with perfect aim. His squad moved like a machine, clearing room after room. Base was nearly silent after just 15 minutes. Clear, shouted Keller. Just a few left, hiding in the lower tunnels. Call in the airstrike, Dane ordered. Let's burn the rest. As the others prepared the beacon for the strike, Dane walked deeper into the base alone. He followed a trail of blood and broken crates into a dim corridor. His boots crunched on glass as he entered a small chamber part storage, part lab. There, in the corner, was a young Zalari. She was clearly wounded, one arm wrapped in torn cloth, and her breathing shallow. Her translation device sparked beside her. She didn't raise a weapon. She didn't attack. She just looked up at Dane with wide eyes. He raised his rifle, finger on the trigger, but something inside him paused. She looked terrified. Not dangerous. She didn't wear full battle armor. There were books and tools scattered near her. She had probably been a technician or translator, not a fighter. Dane frowned. His orders were clear: no survivors, but this didn't feel right. He lowered the rifle just slightly. Are you a soldier? He asked. The Zalari blinked and tapped her broken device. It buzzed and clicked. Her voice came out slow and broken. Unknot. Soldier, I help. Speak your tongue, Dane's jaw tightened. She was a translator, probably forced into this war like many others. Can you walk? He asked. She looked confused. He repeated slowly, Can you walk? She nodded barely. Over his radio, Keller spoke again. Airstrike ready. Get clear. 5 minutes. Dane looked down at the alien, then at the beacon on the floor nearby, flashing red. He made a choice. Come on, he said, grabbing her arm gently. We're getting out of here. She hissed in pain but followed him. Dane pulled her through a side tunnel just as the walls began to shake. The roar of engines filled the air above. The bombs were coming. He ran, helping her as fast as he could. They stumbled through a maintenance shaft that opened into the outer cliffs. The sky above turned orange as fire rained down on the base. Explosions lit the darkness behind them. Dane found a small cave and pulled her inside just as the shockwave hit. Dust and heat filled the air. Outside the base was no more just fire and rubble. They lay there for a moment, coughing and catching their breath. The Zalar looked at him, confused. You saved me, she asked slowly. Dane nodded, still breathing hard. Yeah, I did. Why? He didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know. Maybe it was the fear in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't fought back. Or maybe he was just tired. Tired of killing. Tired of this war. He looked out of the cave at the destroyed base. The war would go on. His team thought he was dead. He had broken orders, hidden an enemy, and gone dark. But for now, he had saved a life, and that changed everything. Lieutenant Dane Rourke sat quietly near the mouth of the cave, staring into the burned landscape. The sky was dark and dusty. The air smelled like ash. In the distance, fires still burned where the enemy base once stood. Inside the cave, the wounded, Alien rested. Her breathing was slow, but she was alive. Her name, she had said, was Vesh. She was unlike any Zalari Dane had seen in battle, smaller, thinner, and without the hard armored plates that covered most soldiers. Her scales were a soft green, and her voice when the translation device worked was calm. Even gentle Dane had removed his helmet and armor to rest, but he kept his sidearm close. Trust was dangerous in war. Even now, he looked at her. She was sleeping, but her face was tight with pain. He had done something unthinkable. He had broken the rules. He had saved the enemy. And now he was alone, cut off from his team, presumed dead, hiding on a planet covered in smoke and war. But strangely, he felt no regret. When Vesha woke up, she was confused and weak. Dane helped. Her drink from a water pack. She was slow to speak, her voice rough. "Why did you not kill me?" she asked, her translator buzzing. Dane shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I'm tired of this war." Vesha coughed, then smiled weakly. "Are different." They sat in silence for a while. The cave was dark and cold, but it was safe for now. Dane knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. His team would move on to the next mission. But he couldn't call for help without exposing Vesha. If Command found out he had saved an alien, they would call him a traitor. Still, something about her story bothered him. "You said you're not a soldier," he asked. "Then what are you doing in a military base?" Vesha nodded slowly. "I was forced. My skill is language. I learned your tongue in school. The War Council took me. H made me translate intercepted signals. I did not choose this." Dane narrowed his eyes. "You're saying you were kidnapped by your own people?" "Not kidnapped. Ordered. Zalari, society does not allow refusal. I had to obey." Dane thought about that. On Earth, soldiers volunteered. On Zalar, maybe they didn't have that choice. Vesha reached into her pouch and pulled out a small black chip. "This data crystal. It has proof of lies." Dane looked at her, surprised. "Lies?" Vesha nodded. "Your leaders think we started war. We think same. But both sides were pushed. Someone wanted war. Someone powerful." Dane stared at the chip. His hands clenched. If she was right, this war might not be what it seemed. Over the next 2 days, Dane took care of Vesha. He made simple meals from his rations, gave her medicine from his field kit, and slowly helped her recover. They talked. More, sometimes they even laughed. He learned that she had never been off her homeworld before the war. She liked music and drawing. She asked him about Earth, and he told her about trees, oceans, cities filled with lights. Dane found himself forgetting she was the enemy. But every hour, reality came crashing back. His radio stayed silent. He had turned off his tracker to hide. He knew his squad would think he had died in the airstrike. It gave him time, but not much. On the 3rd night, Dane climbed the ridge and sent a short-coded message from a portable beacon. He didn't say where he was or who he was with. He only sent it to one person, Sergeant Keller, his closest friend. "I'm alive. I need your trust. We'll explain soon. Don't report this, please." Shut the beacon down fast. Back in the cave, Vesha looked nervous. "You contacted your people?" "Just a friend," Dane replied. "Someone I trust." Vesha's eyes lowered. "They will still punish you for helping me." Dane nodded. "Probably. Why do you risk everything?" she asked. Dane looked at her. His voice was low. "Because if what you're saying is true, then someone wants this war to keep going, and people are dying for nothing." Vesha said nothing, but her eyes softened. Later that night, Dane plugged the data crystal into his tablet. The translator helped convert the alien files. The screen lit up with video logs, intercepted orders, and secret messages. The files showed something terrible. The war had been started by a group of powerful leaders on both sides who wanted more control. They had faked attacks, created lies, turned fear into hate. Dane stared at the screen, sick to his stomach. He had killed so many. For this, he looked at Vesha, who was watching him closely. "I believe you," he said quietly. She looked relieved but also afraid. What will you do now? She asked. I don't know, he admitted. This can't stay hidden. He stood up, shoulders tense. They'll come looking for me soon. If they find you, it's over. Vesha nodded. Then we must be ready. Dane looked out into the night. The wind howled across the rocks. He had a decision to make. He could run, or he could fight for the truth. Dane Rourke knew time was running out. Every hour they stayed on Karsus 9, the risk of discovery grew. His emergency message had been sent 2 days ago, and there had been no reply. Either Sergeant Keller was still searching, or the message had been ignored, or worse, intercepted. Inside the cave, Vesha was now strong enough to walk. Her wounds were healing, though slowly. She still limped and held her side, but her eyes were clear and sharp. Dane had shown her more of the Earth soldiers' equipment maps, signals, even a small drone. They planned a route across the rocky valleys to a broken satellite relay tower. It was risky, but if they could reach it, they might send the data to command. But something else had changed. Dane wasn't just protecting Vesha anymore. He believed her. The proof on her data crystal, the videos, the secret orders they showed. The truth. The war had been started by people in power who lied to both sides. Vesha's courage in bringing the truth gave Dane a new purpose, not just to survive, but to expose the lies. They left the cave at dawn. The air was cold and filled with smoke from the past bombing. Dane used a scanning visor to check for patrols. The area seemed clear. Vesha stayed close, wearing parts of a damaged Zalari cloak to hide her features. If any human soldiers saw her, they'd shoot first and ask questions later. They moved slowly across the rocky land, climbing down into the burned valley where the communication tower had once stood. Now, only half of it remained. The rest was buried under metal and dust. Dane pushed aside debris, searching for the emergency panel. It sparked faintly damaged, but not dead. This should work, he said. He inserted the data crystal and began uploading the files. The signal was weak, and the system was old. But it might reach orbit. But just as the signal connected on, alarm beeped. Motion detected. Approaching aircraft. Dane cursed and pulled Vesha behind a fallen wall. A human patrol ship landed nearby. Dust and sand blew in the air. The side doors opened, and 3 armored soldiers stepped out fully armed and scanning the area. They had found the signal. Dane gritted his teeth and whispered, "Stay here, no matter what." He stood up and raised his hands slowly. The soldiers aimed their rifles. One of them stepped forward. "Identify yourself." "Lieutenant Dane Rourke." "United Terran Forces," he said clearly. "I'm not your enemy." Soldiers looked shocked. One of them tapped his helmet. "Command, we found him. Rourke is alive." I repeat, Rourke is alive. Dane didn't resist as they cuffed his hands and scanned his ID. "You were declared KIA," the lead soldier said. "What happened out here, sir?" Dane looked back at the pile of rubble where Vesha was still hiding. "I'll explain everything. But I need to speak to command directly." Hours later, Dane sat in a cold metal room on an orbiting military station. His armor had been taken. He was wearing a plain jumpsuit. Guards stood at the door. Single camera blinked red in the corner. The door opened. Sergeant Keller walked in, his face tight with emotion. "I knew you weren't dead," Keller said. "What in the galaxy happened down there?" Dane stood. "I need your help. But first, just promise me you'll listen, all the way." Keller nodded slowly. So Dane told him everything. From the moment he found Vesha in the ruined base, to the data crystal, to the truth about the war's beginning. Keller didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Where's the alien now?" "She's on the surface, hiding. She trusted me, and I trusted her." Keller looked down. "Dane, this is serious. You saved an enemy. That's against protocol. The tribunal may see it as treason." Dane's voice was steady. "Then let them. She's telling the truth. You've seen enough battles to know this war isn't clean. You've been fed lies for years." Keller sighed and walked out. The door locked again. Vesha was soon found and captured by another patrol. They brought her to the station in chains. Like a criminal. Soldiers stared at her with hate. She didn't fight. She said nothing. Dane watched from behind a thick glass wall as she was dragged into a cell. The next day, a full military tribunal was called. Dane stood in front of a large screen, hands bound, with officers sitting in judgment. They wore hard faces and shiny medals. "You are charged with disobeying orders, aiding the enemy, and compromising military operations," one officer said. Dane lifted his head. "I did what was right." The room was silent. "You admit to harboring a Zalari?" another officer asked. "I saved someone who wasn't a soldier. She helped me uncover the truth. We've both been lied to." The tribunal didn't look convinced. "You could be executed for this," the lead judge said. Dane didn't flinch. "Then do it. But first look at the data I uploaded. Read the files. Watch the videos." The tribunal exchanged quiet glances. Later that night, Dane sat alone in his cell. He felt the weight of the silence, of the unknown. He didn't know what the judges would decide. He only knew he had done what his conscience told him was right then. His footsteps. The door opened. Sergeant Keller stepped in, his face serious. "You're not free yet," he said. "But something's happening." "What do you mean?" "One of the high-ranking officers has taken interest in the case. A retired admiral. He wants to speak." "In your defense," Dane blinked. "Who, Admiral?" "Kestron. He knew your father." Dane stood slowly. Maybe, just maybe, someone powerful was finally ready to listen. The courtroom was large, cold, and silent. The United Terran Military Tribunal was one of the highest in command. Only the most serious cases were heard. Here cases of betrayal, war crimes, or treason. Lieutenant Dane Rourke stood tall, though. His wrists were still bound. He wore a simple gray uniform. His eyes were steady, but his heart was heavy. He had told the truth, and now he would be judged for it. On the other side of the glass wall, Vesha sat quietly in a special containment chamber. A thick shield of energy kept her separated. Armed guards stood beside her. She didn't speak, but her glowing yellow eyes were fixed on Dane. She looked afraid, but she also looked proud. The 3 tribunal judges entered. All were high-ranking generals with years of war experience. One of them, General Bryn, was known for being strict and harsh. She looked at Dane with cold eyes. The session began. "You are charged with desertion, disobedience, and treason," General Bryn said. "You were ordered to destroy all enemies on Karsus 9. Instead, you saved one. Do you deny this?" Dane stood straight. "No, ma'am, I do not deny it." "Then why?" she asked sharply. "Why would you risk everything for an enemy?" "Because—" "She wasn't a threat," Dane said firmly. "She was wounded, unarmed, and not a soldier. She helped me discover the truth about this war." Murmurs filled the room. Another judge leaned forward. "You believe this alien, that she speaks the truth?" Dane didn't hesitate. "I do, and I have proof." We pointed toward the evidence screen beside the judges. "Oh, the data crystal she carried contained secret messages, intercepted orders, and recordings. They prove the war began under false information. Our leaders and hers were manipulated." General Bryn raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" "We don't know yet. The files show that certain individuals on both sides faked attacks to spark conflict. The war was started to give more power to those in control." The judges looked at each other. They didn't speak, but the tension in the room grew heavier. Just then, doors opened. A tall man with silver hair and a long dark coat entered. His face was sharp, but calm. A group of officers followed him. General Bryn stood up. "Admiral Kestron, you no longer serve on active duty. This is highly unusual." Admiral Kestron saluted. "I come with permission from High Command. I request." "A private session with the tribunal?" Judges whispered among themselves for a moment, then agreed. Dane was led out of the room. Vesha was returned to her cell. The next 2 hours were a mystery. Dane waited in silence. Finally, the door opened again. Sergeant Keller entered, looking both serious and hopeful. "They're not releasing you," Keller said. "Has changed. What is it?" Dane asked quickly. The tribunal is now considering a different option. They want to verify the data crystal and stop the enemy strike on the human colony. Dane's eyes widened. You mean the one Vesha warned about? Keller nodded. Yes. The colony on New Terra is under threat. Vesha's intel says the Zalari military will launch a full attack in less than 1 week. Dane stood. We have to warn them. There's more, Keller said. Admiral Kestron has convinced the tribunal to let you and Vesha take on a secret mission to infiltrate a Zalari command ship, send out the truth, and stop the attack. Dane was shocked. They're trusting us? Not fully, Keller replied, but they have no other choice. This may be the only way to stop a massive war crime. Dane took a deep breath. He thought about the risk. About Vesha. About all the lives at stake. Then he nodded. I'll do it. Vesha was brought into a secured chamber. The first time, the energy shield between her and Dane was gone. She looked weak, but determined. We have a mission, Dane said quietly. She listened as he explained everything the colony. The plan and the permission to act? They want us to go together? She asked. Yes. They need us to stop this before it's too late. Vesha looked down. If we fail, we will die. Dane nodded. But if we don't try, millions will suffer. She slowly lifted her eyes. Then I will go. I trust. You, the next day, Dane and Vesha were given special stealth armor, translation gear, and one small ship. They were told to fly towards Zalari's space, where a massive warship was gathering forces for the attack on New Terra. The mission was simple, but it's dangerous. Enter the ship. Upload the truth, stop the war. Dane and Vesha sat side by side in the small shuttle. The stars stretched before them. The past was behind them. Ked only uncertainty. Vesha glanced at Dane. Do you believe peace is possible? Dane looked out at the stars. I don't know, but I believe in truth. Truth can change everything. The ship flew on, silent and unseen. The real battle was just beginning. The stealth shuttle moved through the cold darkness of space like a shadow. No signal, no sound.
Ow.
Just silent engines and hidden hopes. Inside, Lieutenant Dane Rourke sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the glowing image on the screen ahead. The target, a massive Zalari warship. Orbiting close to the human colony of New Terra, the alien vessel was shaped like a giant claw, dark metal glowing with faint red lines. It carried hundreds of soldiers, heavy weapons, and missiles powerful, enough to destroy an entire city. And it was just days away from launching a full attack. Behind Dane, Vesha adjusted her armored gear. It wasn't made for comfort. It was made for survival. The armor was Zalari, in design taken from storage to help them blend in. Even her scent had been masked with special spray. Are you ready? Dane asked, looking over his shoulder. Vesha nodded. As ready as I can be. But we must move fast. Once we're inside, we'll have little time. Dane checked the control panel one last time. Let's do this. They approached the warship using a docking signal stolen from Vesha's old base. It was risky, but it worked. The warship opened its bay doors, accepting them like any other Zalari shuttle. Inside the hangar, large reptilian soldiers moved supplies and checked equipment. None of them looked toward the new arrivals. They had no reason to be suspicious. Dane and Vesha stepped out in full Zalari gear, helmets covering their faces. They walked with purpose, sticking close together. Dane followed Vesha's lead as she moved through the halls with quiet confidence. This way, she whispered through the helmet speaker. The communication core is at the center of the ship. Halls were filled with red lights, heavy footsteps, and strange alien voices. Every few minutes, soldiers passed by, but no one stopped them. Disguise was working for now. Dane's heart pounded in his chest. One wrong word, one wrong look, and they would be exposed. They entered a lift and descended into the heart of the ship. At last, they reached the central communication room, a large chamber full of glowing consoles and energy conduits. This was where orders were sent, where messages were stored, where truth could be broadcasted to every corner of the Zalari Empire. 2. Guards stood outside. Vesha hesitated. "We'll never get in, unless—" Dane stepped forward without warning. He raised a stolen access card and barked something in the Zalari language. The guards looked surprised, but they stepped aside. The door opened. They were in. Inside, Vesha rushed to the main console. She inserted the data crystal. Lines of alien code appeared. The system buzzed as the files began uploading. Dane stood watch near the door, one hand on his weapon. "We don't have long," he said. "How much time?" 2 minutes, Vesha replied. Suddenly, a voice barked from outside. The guards had called someone. They were suspicious now. Footsteps, shouting. The door slid open, and 3 Zalari officers entered, weapons raised. "Stop," one shouted. Dane acted fast. He fired a stun blast that hit the lead officer. Vesha ducked behind the console. The other 2 fired back. A short fight broke out. Dane took a hit to his shoulder but kept firing. Vesha screamed something in Zalari, trying to confuse them. More footsteps echoed from the hallway. "Reinforcements. Upload almost done," Vesha cried. Dane slammed the control panel, locking the door. The last few seconds crawled by. Then the screen turned green. "Upload complete. Broadcasting file," Vesha hit the final command. The data crystal began sending the truth across the ship. Across Zalari networks, across space, secret messages, video files, recordings of false attacks, orders signed by corrupt leaders, everything. A bright blue signal spread out from the console, reaching not just the Zalari, but also human intelligence stations. The truth was no longer hidden. Alarms blared. The door shook under heavy force. The enemy was trying to break in. Dane and Vesha looked at each other. "We did it," she said. "Now we have to get out alive," Dane replied. They ran through the rear maintenance tunnel, dodging fire and alarms. The warship was in chaos. Screens flashed with the broadcast. Soldiers were arguing, confused, angry. Some had stopped fighting. Others demanded answers. The truth was shaking the entire ship in the hangar. Their shuttle was still untouched, but soldiers were everywhere now. "Too many," Dane muttered. "We won't make it out like this." Vesha pulled him behind cover. "There is another way. An escape pod. Small, hidden. Not meant for travel, but it can get us far enough." Dane nodded. "Lead the way." They raced through a back corridor and entered a storage room. Behind a panel was a narrow escape pod just big enough for 2. They jumped inside. Vesha launched it without delay. The pod shot out of the warship like a bullet, disappearing into the stars. Behind them, the Zalari ship floated in silence. The truth had been released. The lies were out. The war would never be the same again. Hours later, the escape pod was picked up by a neutral Terran scout ship. Dane and Vesha were taken into custody. But not as enemies, not as criminals, as messengers of peace. Back on the human station, the reaction was explosive. Some called Dane a traitor. Others called him a hero. But one thing was clear. The war had been built on lies. The data crystal had. Shaken both governments, peace talks began in secret, and somewhere deep in the stars, first walls of hate began to crack. Silence spread across space, the moment the truth was released from the Zalari warship. Thousands of screens lit up on space stations, on ships, on both Zalari and human colonies. The message was clear and shocking. Video proof showed how high leaders from both species had created false attacks to start the war. Secret voices, orders, and evidence revealed how soldiers had been lied to. Millions had died. For nothing but power and control. Across both worlds, chaos followed. But not the kind of chaos filled with gunfire. This time it was questions, doubt, and finally, hope. Dane Rourke stood near the window of a hospital bay on a Terran space station. His arm was in a sling, and a small scar ran across his cheek. But he was alive. More than that, he had done what no one else dared. He had broken. The rules. He had saved the enemy, and he had changed everything behind him. The door opened. It was Admiral Kestron. "You're lucky," the Admiral said, walking over. "You were 2 seconds from being branded a criminal for life. Now they're calling you something else." Dane turned. "What's that?" The soldier who stopped? "The War." Kestron smiled faintly. "Quite the title." Dane didn't smile back. "I didn't do it alone." He looked toward the second room across the hallway. Through the glass wall, he could see Vesha, sitting on a bed. She was dressed in neutral medical clothing, her eyes calm, watching the stars. "She risked everything," Dane said. "Without her, none of this would have happened." Kestron nodded. "And that's exactly why she's being treated with respect. High Command is no longer calling her a prisoner. They're calling her a witness." Dane felt relief. "Peace talks have started." Kestron continued. "Private meetings between our council and Zalari leaders. It won't be easy. There's a lot of anger and loss. But for the first time in decades, both sides are listening." Dane asked quietly. "And us?" Kestron paused. "You're not in the clear yet. Some officials still see you as a rule breaker, but others, they see you as something better. A soldier with a heart. A fighter who refused to hate." He placed a hand on Dane's shoulder. "You may never go back to a normal military life, but you've already done more than most generals ever will." Dane nodded slowly. He didn't need medals. He didn't need awards. He just wanted peace. Later that evening, Dane visited Vesha. The room was quiet. She stood as he entered. "You look better," Dane said with a small smile. "So do you," she replied. Her translator still buzzed, but her voice felt warmer. He sat beside her. "They're saying the war might end," Vesha whispered. Dane nodded. "People are waking up. Not everyone wants to keep fighting." She looked down. "Many still hate us, both sides." "That will not change quickly." "No, it won't," Dane agreed. "But this is a start. You gave them a chance to know the truth that matters." There was a long pause. "Do you regret saving me?" Vesha asked suddenly. Dane looked into her yellow eyes. "Never." Vesha smiled. A real smile, soft and peaceful. "I think our war was never between soldiers," she said. "It was between those who wanted truth and those who feared it." Dane leaned back, thinking about the people they'd lost, the battles they'd fought, and the strange path that had brought them. "Here, maybe now," he said, "we can start something better." Weeks passed. Peace talks continued. Angry voices tried to restart the war, but they were fewer now. People on both sides had seen the files. Soldiers questioned their orders. Civilians demanded answers. And above all, they remembered 2 people who had chosen mercy over hate. Dane and Vesha were not forgotten. News stations told their story. Some painted Dane as a traitor at first, but later as a hero. Children learned his name in school. Vesha was no longer seen as an enemy, but as a brave soul who stood for truth. Together, they became symbols of something rare: courage beyond the battlefield. One day, Dane stood in front of a gathering at a peace center on New Terra. People from many planets had come to listen. Humans, Zalari, even other species. He spoke simply. "I was taught to follow orders. I was trained to fight without question. But on the day I met Vesha, I learned something new. Sometimes the right choice is not the easy one." He looked at the crowd. "I broke the rules, because the rules were wrong. I saved a life. And in doing so, I found the truth. That truth has now saved many others." The crowd clapped not in loud cheers, but in quiet, respectful applause. After the speech, Vesha joined him on the stage. Together, they stood side by side, no longer enemies. No longer alone, just 2 voices in a galaxy learning how to listen. Epilogue. Years later, war did not return. Tension remained in some places, but peace grew stronger. Shared projects, cultural exchanges, and new alliances formed. Slowly, wounds began to heal. Dane Rourke never returned to the battlefield instead. He worked as a peace ambassador, traveling between systems, sharing his story. Vesha joined him teaching, translating, and helping others see the value of understanding. They never called themselves heroes, but history remembered them as such. Two strangers from opposite worlds, who dared to believe in something greater. Hope.